I'm Jessica Paduganan, a sophomore here, major in sociology and intending to go to law school. So it's going to be a little bit different than what we've seen so far because mine has really nothing to do explicitly with technology or science. So here we go. So when I first heard the term human rights, I thought I had a pretty good idea of what they were. They're the rights of humans. But after taking a few classes and discussing human rights and completing the human rights course thread, I've realized that I've barely scratched the surface. The 3 courses I took in human rights have dramatically changed the way I look at world relations. So these are the 3 classes I took. I took classes on the Holocaust, Gandhi and the Civil Rights Movement in America, and the history and practice of human rights. There is one thing that I have learned at all in this entire world is that the world in all its wonder and glory is extremely complex. My first class was chosen out of pure interest, the history of the Holocaust. I felt that as a subject that is often brought up when talking about world history, I ought to know the details surrounding this global event. I read about the devastation, the politics, the immense loss. I saw pictures of the families before the Holocaust and the remaining fragments after. I even got to meet a Holocaust survivor, Dora Sorrell. Her story was nothing short of amazing and is one of millions. I did not know how to try to begin to understand to make sense of one of the biggest robbery murders of mankind. And although I read about psychological defense mechanisms used by the Nazis and justification of following orders, I was still left with no answer. Genocide was incomprehensible. What was most saddening was when I heard that other countries turned blindly away. And this was a theme that continued to reoccur throughout all my courses. Was it lack of knowledge? No. Lack of care? Probably not. Lack of will? Absolutely. During the same semester, I enrolled in a religious studies class on Gandhi and the Civil Rights Movement. I thought it'd be interesting to learn about a major human rights figure that was outside of the European and American sphere. I learned a lot about Gandhi's influence, especially on nonviolence, civil disobedience, and peaceful protesting. I also learned how the United States Civil Rights Movement was a catalyst and reflection of other rights movements around the globe, like that of India. I especially enjoyed reading about women activists because they often get left out of the historical picture. Women such as Polly Murray, Susan B. Anthony, and Mary McLeod Bethune are just some of the many women who spoke up for civil rights and women's rights. But the event that impacted me the most during this class was the opportunity to become an American Cultures Engaged Scholarship participant and work with the Meiklejohn Civil Liberties Institute, so MCLI for short. MCLI is a unique non-governmental think tank that combines archives with ongoing research and training. As an intern there, I was exposed to the United Nations and their bodies of laws and conventions and treaties. I learned about basic fundamentals of human dignity, human rights, and international law. And during my time there, I worked on 2 shadow reports that were submitted to the UN recently, one on the International Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, ICERD for short, and one for the International Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, ICAT for short. So for ICERD, I wrote about the US's discrimination of gay marriage rights within and between the states. I argued that every state has their own laws and statutes that define marriage and its legality. The federal government also has their own criteria within different departments. I wrote to ICERD explaining that instead of condemning and eliminating racial discrimination, which this follows under the definition of discrimination for ICERD, that the US government is being a prime example of the various complications and criteria that exist in our country today. For ICAT, I wrote specifically about student loan debt and the debilitating effects it has on US citizens every day, qualifying it as a form of degrading treatment. Having student loan debt affects many, if not all, aspects of a person's life. When a person cannot pay their loans, it goes into default, and a ruined credit score, garnished wages, withholding of parts of one's Social Security benefits, the inability to renew professional licenses, and prohibition from enlisting in the armed forces are just a few of the consequences. In addition, I made this poster on the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Leaving MCLI, I learned a tremendous amount not only about the topics that I researched and wrote on, but most importantly about what it means to treat someone with human dignity and respect. After learning this and starting to see how complex our world is, I found myself becoming frustrated and uncomfortable with the issues that our own country has, and we have a lot of them. I find myself becoming disgusted with politics and asking, where's the common sense and who thought this would be a good idea? Seriously. And while I still do not have answers for this, my last course gave me a much broader picture and a slightly better understanding. This past semester, after deciding that I may want to minor in human rights, I took the minor's core course, The History of Human Rights. Theories of human rights, foundations of laws, the evolution of humanitarian law, rights within states and within the global sphere, genocide, and more were thrust upon me. Through this class, I've begun to understand that the much larger picture of what human rights are, both theoretically and in real life. And more importantly, I am seeing these theories and concepts in action. But the part of the course that has stood out to me the most has been the last module, Accountability and Enforcement. Samantha Power's A Problem from Hell, Catherine Sicking's The Justice Cascade, and Stephen Hopgood's The End Times of Human Rights were just some of the books we read related to this topic. Power's book questions why time and time again the United States has chosen to look away from genocide, committed all over the globe, and become bystanders to this horrible crime. The Justice Cascade is a well-written historical explanation of how human rights prosecutions have and continue to change world politics. Accountability has been slowly shifting from state responsibility to that of individuals. Finally, Hopgood's End Time of Human Rights investigates how the modern-day conception of human rights is slowly coming to a close. He argues that humanism was a secular replacement for the Christian God, and that the global spread of human rights was a strategy for coping with what Nietzsche called the death of God. Throughout his book, Hopgood builds up this argument and predicts what a future neo-Westphalian world will look like. My eyes were open to the complexities and issues within human rights law in a global community, especially with that of the United States. Through another class reading, Jonathan Simon's book, Mass Incarceration on Trial, I have learned about the plethora of unconstitutional and human rights violating practices that compromise our own prison system. One of the projects for this history class has been to write a policy brief for Amnesty International on abolishing the United States prison industrial complex. In my policy brief, I am pushing for the enforcement of the Supreme Court's decision in Brown v. Plata to reduce the total prison population by 30,000 inmates. In addition, I am calling for the implementation of proper out-of-prison community rehabilitation centers for low-level, nonviolent felons as an alternative to incarceration. By delving deeper into one specific human rights violation in the world, and especially within the United States, I have begun to see that laws and solutions are immensely multidimensional. The issues related to state sovereignty and enforcement of human rights violations had never before been so stark to me until now. And I have a much better understanding of why the United States does what it likes and why enforcement and international trials are not easy things to accomplish. This only strengthens the frustration and disgust that was beginning to cultivate in me before, which begs the question that Stephen Hopgood alludes to: is this the end of human rights? I argue no. While our present-day human rights infrastructure may be weakening and losing its authority, the moral concept of human rights and human dignity can and is understood by most people, a concept that will not go away. And I argue that this will continue to live on through the people at a local grassroots level, because human rights are constructed and viewed differently in different places. The course threads on human rights have completely changed my understanding of what human rights are and what that means in the modern day. I have learned about the global atrocities that have occurred, the fight for rights internationally and domestically, and the history and consequence of human rights. The more I learn, the more complex the world becomes, and the more I question how we are to change the problems at hand. They will not be easy to fix, but I am optimistic and have faith in the world. As Vince Lombardi once said, the measure of who we are is what we do with what we have. Thank you.